I promise you that this panel will be the only Cuban panel in history that doesn't go over time limits. Each of us will speak about 12 minutes and we will have a discussion. I thank you all for challenging the nice weather outside, and I am very proud to present an outstanding panel here. But before I will say some words, it is my contention that countries that are deeply adversarial, like the United States and Cuba, can engage in civilized discussions. If the United States and Cuba can't do that, at least we here today can try to do it. I would like to repeat now the words of Hannah Arendt that were quoted in the inauguration of this Congress, because nor Anna nor you, Annie, were here when we had the inauguration, and I quote now: "The only way to humanize all that happens in the world and all that happens to ourselves is to speak about it. And by speaking about it, we learn to become human." There is very much hypocrisy, double standard, and simplification at work in the case of Cuba. And I hope that this panel will be able to illuminate at least 5 factors that neither the press nor the governments of Europe, maybe with the very respectable exception of Spain, used to talk so much about. One of these untold factors is the connection, and I would like to underline just this word, the connection between the demand of changes in Cuba and 1. Guantanamo, 2. The Helms-Burton Act, 3. Terrorism against Cuba, and the anti-Castro industry in Miami and abroad. 4. The Commission for Assistance to a Free Cuba. 5. The Cuban Adjustment Act. We demand democratic changes in Cuba. The Cubans demand democratic changes in Cuba. But we do it not without, but with Guantanamo. And I wonder, is it possible to build a democracy when a foreign power keeps a torture camp in your country against the international law and against the will of the Cuban people? The Helms-Burton Act from '96 is a mighty factor, unacknowledged by the press in Europe and forgotten by the most of the governments of the European Union. According not only to the Cuban government, but according to every expert on this issue, for example, Robert Mill, which is an American attorney specializing in international law matters, the Helms-Burton Act and the political dynamic it has created, both within the United States and abroad, constitute the greatest threat to Cuba's sovereignty that has existed since that country achieved independence from Spain. I name terrorism, but I am not talking about Islamic terrorism against the United States, but Cuban-American terrorism against Cuba. I don't know if you know that there are unpunished terrorists going free as in Miami. If you want to know everything about them, please read Luis' book, Cuba Confidential, or just ask questions to her here today, because no one knows more than Luis about this matter. We demand radical changes in Cuba. You can't hear me. Okay, I'm sorry. Did you hear what I said about Luis and this book? Nobody knows more about Cuban-American terrorism against Cuba than Luis. So read please this book, Cuba Confidential. I name this of terrorists, but we demand radical changes in Cuba in spite of the so-called Commission for Assistance to a Free Cuba, which exhaustively codifies how the government of Cuba will be toppled. It punishes even the Cuban-American community, violating family values and creating more bitterness and division among Cubans. The Commission for Assistance to a Free Cuba stipulates, for example, that there will be an American coordinator for the Cuban transition to democracy. Please try to imagine that in 1975, a foreign power, for example France, had imposed a French coordinator for the Spanish transition to democracy, with the right and the duty to fiscalize what the Spaniards should do or should not do in their own country. This commission has also a secret annex, probably a secret warfare plan that is secret because of national security reasons. And finally, I name the Cuban Adjustment Act from '66. What is that? Regardless of their immigration status, Cubans are eligible to apply for residency a year and a day after they set foot on the United States. If they are intercepted at sea, they are sent back to Cuba. But if they go ashore in Key West or wherever in the States, they are lovingly embraced by the authorities. If you happen to be Haitian or Mexican or from Guatemala, okay, then there is no mercy for you. Between Mexico and the United States, there is a war, but in the Strait of Florida, this law encourages trafficking with human beings. The secret war against Cuba is the story of a major American failure. That secret war corrupted American institutions in ways that it occasioned the destruction of 2 presidencies. With these things, with these factors that I just mentioned, mainly this commission and Helms-Burton bill, that secret war became an open war. I think that a climate of peace has to be created in order to let the Cubans implement changes. The governments of the United States and Cuba have to initiate negotiations and talks. But in a fraction of the Cuban exile community, the only idea of conversations is still considered a crime, a criminal act. That this undeclared war has persisted for almost 50 years is a testimony more to passion for vengeance than to any love of democracy or prosperity. It is critical to speak about these factors, to understand why Cubans, which want to change a society full of inefficiency and totalitarian control, ask themselves very carefully before they make any move. For whom is this or that change? For ourselves or for Washington? For ourselves or for Miami? For ourselves or for Mr. Carl Bildt, the Minister of Foreign Relations of Sweden, whose Cuba policy is inconsistent and sadly in line with the American isolation. As a Swede, I say this with deep sorrow. The Cuba policy of our minister is a disgrace for the Cuban people and for Sweden. And when Fidel dies, the Cubans have all the right in the world to ask themselves for whom the bells toll. Rafael, you live in Cuba. Rafael Hernandez lives and works in Havana. He has written about culture, about politics, about public opinion, and about civil society. He has been professor and researcher at the University of Havana and the High Institute of International Relations. He has been director of the United States Studies at the Centro de Estudios sobre América for 18 years. He has taught as a professor at Howard, Columbia, the Woodrow Wilson Center, Johns Hopkins, etc. Rafael?